David, 55, had always depended on his health insurance, especially after several serious health issues. His insurance was a constant source of reassurance until one day everything came crashing down. The letter from his insurance company arrived unexpectedly. It was about the new Medicare system being rolled out, and it said that in order to keep his coverage, David had to go through a new identity verification process. It wasn't just a simple form or a routine update, it was a full-on bureaucratic overhaul. The letter demanded he provide more documentation than he had ever imagined. The new system required everything from proof of address to multiple forms of identification, documents David had never needed before. As he read through the letter, a knot tightened in his stomach. Why all the paperwork, and why now, he wondered, already dreading the lengthy process ahead. He had always been on top of his insurance, so why was this new system throwing up so many roadblocks? David didn't think it would be so complicated. After all, he had been with his previous insurance company for years, but now the system had changed and he felt completely out of control. He could already sense the frustration building. He was a man who didn't have time to waste. His health was deteriorating and he relied on consistent medical care. The idea that a technical issue could put that in jeopardy was terrifying. He immediately reached for his phone to call the customer service number, but even that felt like a gamble. He had no idea how long the wait would be or if anyone would even answer. But there was no choice. He had to get through this process, no matter how frustrating it was going to be. David had never expected something as simple as transferring his health insurance to become such a nightmare. After receiving the letter outlining the new Medicare system and the required identity verification process, he felt the stress start to build in the pit of his stomach. But nothing prepared him for the mountain of paperwork and hurdles that lay ahead. The email he received from his insurance company the next day was an overwhelming checklist of documents. Submit proof of address, provide 2 forms of ID, send us your birth certificate, include a copy of your last tax return, get your social security records. The list went on and on. David was no stranger to paperwork, but this felt like something out of a bureaucratic nightmare. He had been with his previous insurance for years, and suddenly he was asked to jump through hoops he didn't even know existed. David sat down at his kitchen table, staring at the screen, reading the email over and over again. His mind raced. Where would he find all these documents? Some were old and stored in boxes in the attic. Some of the papers, like his social security records, hadn't been touched in years. The thought of going through all of them, digging through dusty boxes just to prove who he was, made him feel like he was being punished for something he hadn't even done. Determined to tackle the task head-on, David picked up the phone and called the state office to request a certified copy of his birth certificate. After holding for 15 minutes, an automated voice finally asked for his information. He gave it, only to be told that the office could not guarantee when the certificate would be ready. It could take weeks. Weeks? His heart sank. He needed this done now. His health was deteriorating, and every day that passed without confirmation of his new Medicare coverage made him feel more vulnerable. He couldn't afford to wait for weeks. With no other choice, he decided to visit the local government office in person, hoping to speed things up. When he arrived, the line stretched out the door. People in front of him were frustrated too, some even arguing with the staff about delays and errors in the system. David could feel the tension building around him. As he waited, he watched as people left empty-handed, some even shaking their heads in disbelief. Finally, after 2 hours of waiting, David was called up to the counter. The woman behind the desk informed him that while she could process his request, there was no way to rush it. "You'll just have to wait," she said, flatly. David left the office feeling defeated. The clock was ticking, and this process was draining the life out of him. Back at home, David tried submitting his documents online, hoping it would be quicker than dealing with government offices. But each time he clicked the Submit button, an error message popped up. "Document upload failed. Please try again." He tried again, and again, and again. The same error each time. David's frustration reached a boiling point. How was this supposed to work? Why wasn't the system designed to help people like him? Why was it so complicated and broken? As if the system wasn't enough, his phone started, buzzing with more notifications from the insurance company. "Your verification process is incomplete. Please submit additional documentation." And then another email. "Please upload a copy of your latest tax return." David stared at the screen. He had submitted everything the system had asked for, so why was he still getting these messages? Each email felt like a slap in the face. He was trying his best, but nothing was working. The frustration was suffocating. Days turned into weeks. Every phone call, every form submission felt like a wasted effort. David began to feel like he was trapped in an endless loop of paperwork. His health wasn't improving, and the weight of the verification process was starting to take a toll on him mentally and physically. Each day that passed without resolution, his anxiety grew. He knew his health was deteriorating, and the fear of not having proper coverage was gnawing at him. One night, after spending hours sorting through old tax documents and government records, David sat on his couch, staring at the piles of paperwork around him. He could barely focus. His mind kept racing. What if I don't get this done? What if I lose my health insurance? His hands shook as he scrolled through the insurance website, trying to upload the final batch of documents. The website crashed again. Another error message appeared. "Please check your documents and try again." David's frustration had reached its peak. He slammed the phone down on the table, letting out a deep sigh. His head was spinning, and his body felt exhausted from the endless fight. The idea of dealing with one more form, one more call, one more failure was almost too much to bear. But what other choice did he have? He had no time to waste. His health depended on this process. If he didn't get this sorted out, he could be left without coverage, and that was a risk he wasn't willing to take. David's patience was wearing thin, but it wasn't just the paperwork that was getting to him. It was the constant stream of errors and setbacks that made everything feel like it was slipping out of his control. After days of struggling with the online submission system, David received a new email from the insurance company. "We regret to inform you that your recent submission was rejected due to incorrect information." David stared at the message in disbelief. Incorrect information? How could that be? He had double-checked everything. He had followed every instruction to the letter. His heart sank as he opened the email to find a list of errors that had apparently caused the rejection. Some of the errors seemed absurd. His name was misspelled by a single letter, a middle initial that wasn't in his birth certificate, and his address was listed incorrectly because of a simple typo in the system. "This is ridiculous," David muttered under his breath. "I've been at this for weeks, and now they're telling me it's all wrong." Frustrated but determined to fix it, David took a deep breath and started going through the required documents once again. He had already submitted his proof of address, tax returns, and other identification, but the insurance company had rejected everything because their system had mistakenly pulled up outdated or incorrect data. This was starting to feel like a nightmare that wouldn't end. David called the customer service number once more, hoping this time he'd get a human who could actually help him. After navigating through endless voice prompts, he finally reached an agent. The woman on the other end of the line seemed pleasant enough, but as she pulled up his case, David's frustration began to bubble over. "I don't understand why this is happening," David said. "I've submitted everything correctly." "Why is your system rejecting my information?" The agent's response was less than reassuring. "Our system is automated, sir, and sometimes it pulls up incorrect or outdated records. It looks like your information may have been mismatched." David clenched his fists. "So you're telling me that my health insurance is being held up by an outdated system that no one seems to have control over?" The agent apologized but assured him that he'd need to submit his documents again. This time, the system would be updated and everything would be reviewed more carefully. David hung up the phone, feeling like he had just hit a brick wall. That night, David couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, replaying the conversation over and over in his mind. How much longer could this go on? His health was not improving, and he was getting more stressed out by the minute. The constant back and forth was not just taking up his time, it was wearing him down mentally and physically. He felt as though the insurance company was just passing him along from one mistake to another with no clear resolution in sight. The next morning, David called again. The agent he spoke to this time had a slightly more promising tone. "We've identified the issue," the agent said. "It seems like your address hasn't been updated in our system for years. Your previous insurer never submitted a change when you moved. That's causing the system to reject your documents." David felt a cold knot in his stomach. He had been living in this house for over 5 years. How could his address not be updated? It didn't make sense. It was a simple piece of information that should have been straightforward, but the system had failed to catch it. His mind raced. Why didn't they catch this sooner? He had given them all the correct documentation. Why hadn't the system been updated? The agent assured David that they would correct the issue, but the process would take several more days. Days David didn't have. "You should expect an email confirming the change in about 48 hours, the agent added. David's anxiety shot through the roof. 48 hours? He needed this sorted out immediately, not in 2 days. His doctor's appointments were already looming, and his prescriptions were running low. Every day without proper insurance coverage made him feel more vulnerable, more out of control. David took matters into his own hands. He logged into his online account and tried to correct his address himself. Every time he tried to make the change, though, the system froze. It felt like the universe was conspiring against him. He decided to go to his local insurance office, hoping that speaking to someone in person might speed things up. As he walked through the doors, the familiar feeling of frustration washed over him again. The waiting room was packed with people flipping through paperwork and chatting quietly, all with the same defeated expression that David now wore. After a long wait, David was finally called to the counter. He explained his situation again, and after a brief pause, the employee behind the desk looked up from the computer. "There's nothing we can do here," she said flatly. "The system has to update on its own. You'll have to wait for the email confirmation." David felt a wave of helplessness. He had spent weeks trying to resolve this issue, and the best they could offer was waiting. The employee handed him a printed slip with a reference number and told him to follow up in 48 hours if he didn't hear back. He left the office feeling like he was back at square one, stuck in an endless loop of delays and errors. As the days dragged on, David continued to wrestle with the mounting pressure. The days blurred together as he waited for updates, checked his email obsessively, and made countless calls to customer service. But still, nothing changed. The frustration, the anxiety, the fear of losing his coverage, it was all becoming too much. His health was deteriorating, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the longer this dragged on, the more likely it was that he would fall through the cracks. The system's errors weren't just a technical inconvenience. They were becoming a matter of life and death. David had hoped that after his last conversation with the insurance company, the issue would be finally resolved. The agent had assured him that the system was updating and the address mismatch would be corrected within 48 hours. But as the days passed, nothing changed. Every time David checked his email, there was no confirmation, just more error messages, more confusing requests, and no sign of progress. It felt like the universe was playing a cruel game with him, keeping him in a perpetual state of limbo. But the worst part was that his health wasn't improving. His doctor's appointments were becoming more urgent, and he was running low on his medications. He was stuck in a cycle of waiting for the insurance system to catch up with him, all the while feeling more helpless by the minute. Each day without coverage meant another day he couldn't get the care he needed. It was a frustrating, anxiety-inducing spiral. One morning, David decided he couldn't wait any longer. He grabbed his phone and called the customer service number again. It had become his daily ritual, making a call, explaining his situation, and getting nowhere. After navigating the automated system and waiting for what felt like an eternity, David finally got through to an agent. "I'm sorry, sir, but it looks like the address update hasn't gone through yet. The system is still processing your request," the agent said. "We'll need another 48 hours to complete the update." David felt his blood pressure rise. "Another 48 hours?" he repeated, incredulous. "I've been waiting for weeks. How can it take this long to fix an address?" The agent apologized, explaining that the system was slow, and there were technical difficulties that were out of their control. David's mind was racing. "Out of your control?" he thought. "I've been doing everything right. I've submitted all the necessary documents. Why is it still so hard to get this done?" The agent offered no further explanation and suggested, "David, wait a little longer." His patience snapped. "I'm done waiting," David snapped. "You're telling me that I have to sit here day after day, waiting for a system that's clearly broken. I need help now, not more excuses." The agent paused, clearly taken aback by David's frustration. "I understand your frustration, sir, but at this point, the best I can do is escalate your case to our technical support team. I'll mark it as urgent. You should receive an update in 24 hours. David hung up, fuming. He couldn't believe it. He had been patient, had followed every instruction, and yet he was still stuck in this endless loop. He couldn't afford to keep waiting. His health depended on it. Determined to solve the problem once and for all, David took matters into his own hands. The next day, he made a decision that would change everything. He was going to drive to the insurance company's headquarters. He wasn't just going to wait anymore. If he had to, he would stand at the front desk and demand that they help him immediately. The drive was long, and David's anxiety only increased as he got closer to the office. He had no idea what to expect. He didn't know if they'd be able to help, if he'd just be brushed off again, or if he would even get to speak to someone who could actually make a difference. But he couldn't take another minute of the frustration and helplessness. When he arrived at the office, David was shocked to find that there were dozens of people waiting in the lobby. The entire place felt like a factory of frustration. People filling out forms, making phone calls, arguing with employees. It was a revolving door of complaints, and David felt like he was walking into a nightmare. After waiting for almost an hour, David was finally called to the counter. The woman behind the desk barely looked up as he explained his situation. "I've been waiting for weeks for this address update. I've submitted everything they asked for, and I'm still getting error messages. I need this fixed now." The woman nodded slowly, typed a few things into her computer, and then said, "It looks like the issue is with our system. We're updating records, and some addresses are taking longer than others to process." David could feel his frustration building again. "I've been patient. I've done everything right, but nothing's getting fixed. How much longer do I have? To wait?" She offered no real answer. Instead, she handed him a slip with a reference number and told him to check back in another 48 hours. "There's nothing else we can do for you today," she said flatly. David left the office, this time with a sense of defeat he hadn't felt before. The entire system was broken, and no matter how hard he tried, he seemed powerless to fix it. His health was deteriorating by the day, and this endless waiting game was making everything worse. How many more times would he have to hear the same thing? Wait another 48 hours. As he sat in his car, David felt completely drained. The reality of the situation hit him harder than ever before. He wasn't just fighting a broken system, he was fighting for his health. Every day that passed without his insurance being properly transferred meant one more day without medical coverage, one more day he couldn't see his doctor, one more day his prescriptions went unfilled. David's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was another email from the insurance company. "Your verification is still pending. Please submit additional documents." He wanted to scream. The cycle was never ending. The more he tried to fix it, the more it seemed to fall apart. David was beginning to wonder if he would ever get out of this loop. He had done everything he was supposed to do, followed all the rules, and yet it seemed like nothing was changing. As he pulled out of the parking lot, David made a decision. He was done being passive. If this was going to get fixed, he would have to take charge. The next day, he planned to visit the local Medicare office to see if there was anything they could do, anything that would help him break free from this endless cycle of rejection. But as he drove away, one thought kept nagging at him. What if it was too late? David had reached the edge of his patience. After weeks of phone calls, emails, and countless trips to the insurance office, his frustration was mounting, and his sense of urgency was growing by the day. The continuous cycle of failure, endless error messages, incomplete updates, and the constant 48-hour promises that always seemed to reset was draining him mentally and physically. He felt like he was suffocating under the weight of the bureaucracy, trapped in a system that seemed to have no care for the individual struggles of its users. Every morning, David woke up with a sense of dread, wondering if today would be the day his insurance would finally be approved, or if it would be just another round of rejection. His health had steadily declined since this ordeal started. The physical toll was obvious. His energy was sapped, his appetite had decreased, and his stress was beginning to show on his face. He couldn't remember the last time he had a good night's sleep without waking up in a cold sweat, worrying about his insurance, his health, and the future. He had been to the doctor several times throughout the past month, but with his insurance in limbo, he was forced to pay out of pocket for every visit and prescription. The cost was adding up quickly. The stress of paying for his health care while still being unable to get approved for coverage was unbearable. David had been diagnosed with a chronic condition that required frequent monitoring and medications. Without proper insurance, he was running out of resources to manage his health. The doctor had recommended a new treatment plan, but David couldn't afford it. Without the coverage, those costs were skyrocketing. He had already missed a critical appointment and was now behind on his medical regimen. It was the breaking point for him. That evening, as David sat in his living room, surrounded by papers, insurance forms, medical bills, and a pile of rejected documents. The phone rang. For a moment, he didn't want to answer. Another automated message, another excuse, another empty promise. But the phone buzzed again, and something inside him snapped. "I can't keep doing this," he muttered to himself. He picked up the phone, ready for whatever disappointment was about to come. This time, when he answered, the voice on the other end was different. It wasn't the usual agent with a robotic tone. This time, it was a man who seemed to have some authority. "Hello, Mr. Stevens. This is James Richardson. I'm calling from Medicare's escalation team. I've been reviewing your case." David felt a glimmer of hope. Escalation team? That sounded more promising than the usual customer service line he had been calling for weeks. "I understand you've had a difficult time with the verification process. I want to personally ensure that your case is handled promptly. Can you tell me what's been going on?" David exhaled sharply, as if releasing all the frustration he had been holding in. He explained, once again, the long saga of his failed attempts, the endless loop of forms, the rejections, and the devastating toll it was taking on him. He recounted the hours spent waiting, the broken promises of system updates, and the mounting costs that were pushing him further into debt. James listened patiently. "I understand, Mr. Stevens. It sounds like you've been through quite an ordeal. Let's see if we can get this resolved once and for all." For the first time in weeks, David felt a glimmer of hope. Could this be the breakthrough he'd been waiting for? James reassured him that his case would be marked as urgent and that someone from the technical support team would be in touch soon. He also promised to manually check the information to ensure it was correct. "I'll personally make sure this is handled. Expect a call back from our team within 24 hours. David was cautious. He had heard promises before, but something about James's tone felt different. There was a sincerity there that he hadn't encountered in the many hours he'd spent on the phone with other agents. David agreed to the terms, hoping that this time the promise would be kept. The next day, David waited anxiously by the phone. Every hour that passed felt like a lifetime. He paced around his apartment, replaying the conversation in his head. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was running out of time. His medical appointments were becoming more critical, and he was starting to feel the physical toll of the stress. He barely ate, his hands trembled with anxiety, and his mind spun in circles as he awaited any news. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, his phone rang again. This time, it was a call from an unfamiliar number. "Hello, Mr. Stevens. This is Lisa from the Medicare Technical Support Team. I'm happy to inform you that your address has been successfully updated in our system. We've processed all your documents, and you're now approved for Medicare coverage." David's heart stopped for a moment. Approved? After all this time, the seemingly endless back and forth, the frustrating delays, it had finally happened. He could hardly believe it. Lisa continued, explaining the next steps and confirming that his coverage would begin immediately. She also apologized for the errors in the system and assured him that steps were being taken to improve the process for others who had experienced similar issues. "We understand how important this is, and we've taken your feedback seriously," she added. David felt a wave of relief wash over him. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in weeks. For the first time, he felt like the weight he had been carrying had lifted, even if just a little. "Thank you," he said, his voice shaky. "You have no idea what this means to me." As David hung up the phone, he sank into his couch, overcome with emotion. The last few weeks had been the hardest of his life. The mental and emotional toll had been unbearable at times. But now the nightmare of the endless waiting, the rejection, and the fear of losing his health insurance had finally ended. David took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. But even as he felt a spark of relief, there was still one lingering thought in the back of his mind. How many others were out there going through the same thing? How many more people were stuck in the broken system, waiting for someone to listen to their struggles and help them? David didn't have the answer. But as he finally allowed himself to relax, for the first time in weeks, he made a promise to himself. If anyone else was facing what he had just gone through, he would speak up. He knew how important it was to have a voice in a system that seemed to disregard the needs of the individual, and as for now at least, David had won his battle with the system. David had come a long way since the day he received his insurance approval. What had once seemed like an impossible uphill battle fighting through an overwhelming system had transformed him. No longer just a man struggling with paperwork and waiting on hold for hours, David had found a new sense of purpose. His struggle had become a cause. His fight for health insurance had revealed something much bigger than just his personal issue. It had unveiled the cracks in a system that was leaving countless others behind. And now David was determined to be a voice for those who couldn't fight for themselves. It wasn't easy. Advocacy was a whole different battle, one that David hadn't anticipated when he first started trying to secure his insurance. But after speaking with other people who had experienced similar struggles, David realized how widespread the problem was. He began hearing from people all over the country, sharing their own stories of frustration, confusion, and even financial ruin, all because of an outdated and broken healthcare system. Some of these people had been fighting for years, just like he had. David wasn't a politician, he wasn't a lawyer, he didn't have the resources or influence to change a system that seemed so entrenched in red tape. But he had something far more powerful, his voice. And that voice was becoming louder every day. David knew that to make a real impact, he needed to reach as many people as possible. So he started small, sharing his story on social media, writing blog posts, and connecting with local advocacy groups. His posts quickly gained traction, resonating with people who had felt silenced for too long. David's story of perseverance, frustration, and finally success was something that struck a chord with many. One day, he received an email from a local non-profit organization focused on healthcare reform. They had read his blog and wanted to meet. The email made David's heart race. Could this be the breakthrough he'd been hoping for? He scheduled a meeting with the organization, and when he walked into their office, he was greeted by a group of passionate individuals who were just as dedicated to changing the system as he was. They had seen David's posts and knew that his personal experience could help drive the message home. It wasn't just about fixing the insurance system, it was about giving a voice to people who had been ignored for too long. After that meeting, David was invited to speak at a local town hall meeting where he would share his journey and advocate for reform. The thought of speaking in front of a crowd, let alone a room full of politicians and community leaders, was intimidating. But David knew that he had no choice. This was his moment to make a difference. The day of the town hall, David stood in front of a packed room, his hands slightly trembling. He had prepared a speech, but as he looked around at the sea of faces, he realized that this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about everyone who had been forgotten by the system. The elderly, the disabled, the working parents, the people who had fallen through the cracks just like he almost did. As he began to speak, his nerves faded away. "I'm here today to tell you my story. I fought for my health insurance, and I won. But it shouldn't have taken weeks of fighting just to get coverage. The system is broken, and it's failing people like me every day. His voice grew stronger as he continued, telling his audience about the endless bureaucracy, the incorrect addresses, the technical errors, and the toll it had taken on his health and his life. But he didn't stop there. He talked about the future, about the people who were still stuck in the system, still waiting, still suffering. If I can fight this system and win, imagine what we could all do together, he said. It's time to stop waiting. It's time to start making change. It's time to demand a system that works for all of us, not just the lucky few who can navigate it. As David finished his speech, the room erupted in applause. The energy in the room was electric. People were standing, clapping, some even wiping away tears. For the first time, David felt like he was truly making a difference. The applause was not for him alone, but for everyone who had been suffering in silence. In the weeks that followed, David continued to speak out, attending rallies, writing letters to lawmakers, and working with advocacy groups to push for legislative changes. He found that his voice had power, real power. His story was being heard, and it was inspiring others to stand up and fight for their rights, too. But as his involvement in the cause grew, David began to realize that the fight wasn't going to be easy. Political and corporate interests were deeply invested in the status quo. There were people with power who didn't want the system to change. They didn't want the public to know how broken the system really was. And David soon found himself up against powerful opposition. One evening, David received an anonymous letter. It was a single sheet of paper, typed with no return address, and the message was blunt. Stop pushing for change. You don't know who you're messing with. David's heart raced as he read the letter. The message was a clear threat, and for the first time he felt the weight of the battle he had joined. He could no longer afford to be naive. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. The next day, David met with a local journalist to share his story and the threats he had received. He knew that silence wouldn't protect him. It would only allow the system to continue hurting people. David realized that if he truly wanted to make a difference, he had to be willing to face whatever came his way. As the months passed, David became more entrenched in the fight for healthcare reform. His voice, once just a whisper in the noise of bureaucracy, had now become a rallying cry for others who were tired of waiting, tired of being ignored, and tired of seeing the system fail those who needed it most. He wasn't just fighting for his own health anymore, he was fighting for the future of millions of others. David's story had transformed from one of personal struggle to a movement for change. He had found his purpose, and no matter what obstacles lay ahead, he was ready to keep fighting.